presenter today is David Lenny. He's a graduate from Eastern Illinois University with a BA in Communication Health and minor in Psychology. And then he has also received his occupational therapy degree from Midwestern University. He has experience with children with autism spectrum disorder and other special needs. He has, while he was with Midwestern, he worked with fellow students to do the research that he is presenting today. And he was also one of our very favorite work-study students in the Diveheart office most recently.
As Tina Marie introduced me about 30 minutes ago, I'm David Lenny. I'm an occupational therapist, and I'll be presenting my very modest research that my research group did with Diveheart on the topic of wounded warriors. There'll be some echoing from the last presentation, which is going to be a really hard act to follow. This research was done in the span of about 9 months between 3 of us researchers and our faculty advisor. So, first, a few questions. What is occupational therapy? Does anyone feel like they have a good definition they would like to put forward? That's actually a very good one, yeah. That's better than what most people think. We just help people get jobs, so that's pretty good. Generally, occupational therapists define occupation as anything that's meaningful that takes up our time. And occupational therapy itself functions to help people live their daily lives and get back to doing those things functionally, whether it's simple self-care or things like socialization and community integration and other things like that. Wounded warriors, the definition for that is obviously anyone who's been involved in a military conflict since 9/11, who's acquired some physical or psychological injury. And then adapted sports and adapted scuba, I'm assuming that most of us know that that means sports that have been adapted or modified to fit individuals with cognitive or physical disabilities. And obviously, Diveheart is a model of adapted scuba. So some of the background, it seems like there's always different figures out there. I pulled these from the Wounded Warrior organization website of 48,000 service members who have been physically injured in those conflicts, Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, with an estimated 400,000 with combat-related stress, PTSD, or major depression, and then again another estimated 320,000 with the TBI, which we heard a lot about in the last presentation. I think going off of that too, obviously it is really hard to get people in for those what they call invisible wounds. Service members struggle with reintegration into service, civilian life rather. This was something we saw in one of our research articles when we were looking up specific occupational therapy literature to veterans. And what it found was it didn't actually matter so much. Broadly, they found that most young veterans coming back to civilian life, disability or no disability, actually have a hard time adjusting to civilian life again. But what it also found was that those who did have an injury were twice as likely to experience joblessness and a loss of the occupations and routines that they had before. Leisure was marked in that study as well by the veterans as one of the hardest things for them to get back into when they returned to their civilian life, returning to leisure and other kind of play and sport occupations. And then another finding of that study, just some more background, was that this generation of veterans is one that's seeking help both in the hospital and outside of the hospital, right? It's not such a medical model for these guys because they're not quite as satisfied with just being able to do things that are basic self-care. They kind of want things that are more exciting and more fulfilling. So we took a theoretical lens to our research. This is a model in occupational therapy. It's called the Model of Human Occupation, MOHO. And I'm just going to try and, as briefly as I can, describe it because this was really the lens that we looked at all of our findings with. So basically, in this model, it says that there's these different concepts: volition, habituation, performance capacity, and then the environment. They're all kind of interrelated. And everything that we do is kind of an intermixing of these things. So volition is our motivation to do things. So I'll talk about these like I'll talk about someone training for a marathon maybe. So for someone who's training for a marathon, their motivation to do the training and to run. Values. They probably value their health, right? Interest, they're interested in running. And then this thing called personal causation, this is kind of the intersection of self-efficacy and actual ability. So for someone who's just starting to train for a marathon, maybe they think that they can go out there and run 5 miles in 30 minutes, lickety-split, no problem. That would be obviously not very good personal causation, but that's kind of the intersection of what we can do and what we think we can do. This is actually the focus of our research, was we wanted to see how this motivation with all these different things, values, interests, and that personal causation piece were kind of developed in adapted sports for these wounded warriors. Because what we do know is that people who've recently acquired a disability, whether it's physical or psychological, that there's a big loss of this idea of personal causation. And with that, there may be a loss of interest and values. So that's why we focused on this volition piece. Another piece of this model is habituation, and these are the patterns of the things that we do. So for someone who's a runner, there's routines that go with running. They may run before work, they may run after, there's stretching, there's certain diets and everything. And then there's roles. So for someone who's a runner, they would describe themselves as a runner. If I was going to ask, Tina Marie, who are you? She would say, well, I'm an executive director at Diveheart. I'm a mother. I do this, I do that. Those are kind of our roles that make up our lives. So we were also interested in how those roles and those routines were impacted for these wounded warriors by participating in adaptive sports. Performance capacity is just basically our body's ability to do different things and to perform. And then environment is the physical and social environment. In this model, it's described as how supportive it is. So if you were a runner and it was your first time kind of running and going out there, it probably wouldn't be a very supportive environment to run in a place where there's lots of steep hills or there's lots of things to jump over. And then social environment, obviously, having people around you that are like-minded and that support you. So we were interested in applying this model to our research and seeing what was happening with these guys. That was our question. How does adaptive sports impact the volition of wounded warriors? Initially, we kind of wanted to go for quality of life and self-efficacy, and then it kind of morphed into this looking at it through the MOHO lens and volition. So the design. We'd originally sought out to do a mixed methods, which would be part quantitative design and part qualitative, and what it ended up being was just qualitative because we couldn't really find an instrument that we could use and really research in the amount of time we had for these guys. So it was a phenomenological study, which means the lived experience or the essence of something. So we wanted to know what is the essence of a participating in adaptive scuba and adaptive sports as a wounded warrior. And so the way we did this was we did semi-structured interviews, which means we'd go in with a list of questions that were open-ended, and we kind of ask and see where it went and kind of chase where those things went in the interview. They were 45 to 60 minutes. And then after we have that transcript of the interview, we do what's called thematic analysis, which you go through the transcript and you kind of look at what you felt was a theme. So this particular diver said that after participating in Diveheart, he was able to return to his role as a father. So he said that 3 times, so we underlined that, okay, there's a theme here. He's returning to a past role. After that, we meet as a group. Each of the researchers would do this on their own. We meet as a group, go through it all together, identify our themes there, and then we used what's called the constant comparative method, which is in between each interview, we would code this, find our themes, and use it to inform our next interview. So we were constantly changing the questions a little bit and constantly looking for broader themes that would fit everyone. And then there was one last thing we did to add rigor to our research, and that's it's called a confirming case. And basically what it is after we interviewed 4 guys from Diveheart, we interviewed another wounded warrior who was female who had never participated in adaptive scuba diving to see if she had similar or different experiences and if we'd find similar or different themes. We ended up with 5 participants. We were hoping for a lot more, but again, we were working under a bit of a time crunch, and this was even good enough. So the bulk of our sample was those 4 guys from Diveheart. 2 of them told us they had PTSD as an actual confirmed diagnosis. The other 2 said that they had never received that diagnosis, but they definitely believed that it was something they were dealing with. Mixed in with those was, we had a few guys with TBI. One of our participants had a spinal cord injury. One had orthopedic fractures that impacted some of his movement. And then another participant had schizoaffective disorder in addition to PTSD. And then our confirming case, Honor, the female who'd never participated in adaptive sports, she had a traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, PTSD, and asthma. And we found her by going through a rehabilitation hospital that had an adaptive sports program. They recommended her. We also received we reached out to our participants through Diveheart. Diveheart, we worked with them and they provided us a list of wounded warriors that they've worked with, that they know have dived with them. We reached out to them. There was some snowball sampling where one guy would talk to another guy and send them to us. And that's how we got the majority of them. So after interviewing everyone and going through it, we had 5 solid themes emerge from these guys. One was adaptive sports and traditional rehabilitation, confidence and motivation, identity, community reintegration, and then a military connection. So for this theme of adaptive sports and traditional rehab, all of our participants said that there is just no way that they would have gotten to where they are today without having adaptive sports and adaptive scuba as a piece of that. They said, I think this is the quote that I really like, "You could probably rebound and go back to the hospital again if you didn't have an adaptive scuba diving program or other activities, because those are what kept you out in the community and make you feel happy about life. You don't concentrate on whatever your ailments are." And then I did the traditional rehab, I talked to the counselors, and I had a decent counselor, and it was okay, but it didn't give me a sense of purpose. So what a lot of the guys were saying was, the hospital's great for getting able to just get out of the house. The adaptive scuba diving was what got you out of the house, though. That was your purpose, to actually get out in the community. For our next theme of confidence and motivation, all of them kind of expressed this new skill mastery that came to them. And this was really powerful for obviously guys who had been very independent and very physically active prior to their injury, to be able to take on a new skill and master it. So it gave me a sense of purpose and lets me know what I can accomplish, those normal everyday tasks again. I wasn't questioning if I could or I couldn't do it. If I was good enough, I knew that I was. And then I started approaching new sports and new activities and new endeavors in life with the mentality of, let's just try to find a way to overcome it and adapt. That was another big thing. I think that particular participant said that he had struggled with his role as a father and his role as a husband prior to participating in adaptive scuba. And afterwards, after he'd taken on this mentality of, okay, I was able to scuba dive with these adaptations, there's a way to do that, I can do all these other things. As he started to do that more and more, he said that his son actually told him one time, I know that I can do anything because you've proven that there's a way to overcome these things. So that was really wonderful for us to hear. This theme of identity, so Jim talks about this a lot when he talks about Diveheart, and probably just about every WGN interview he says, instead of seeing a kid with a disability, you're now seeing Susie the diver, right? Not Susie, the girl with the disability. That was big for these guys too. So going through this, I got certified, and then it helped me relax. I was able to sleep, and I had more energy. Then I was able to do more and go out more and be more active. I started hiking, hunting, fishing, doing all these things that I'd stopped doing for a long time. My abilities to do stuff like this has shifted my focus not on what I can't do, but what I can do. We felt that what these individuals were expressing was really that they had a change in their identity of who they were post participating in Diveheart. Community reintegration was another big one. Again, this was just developing these roles and these routines, Diveheart and other adaptive sports really gave these guys a reason to get out more and to actually start practicing those life skills that they had learned in the hospital or through their counselors. So it allowed me to slow down. That's how I was able to readapt back into society. I felt like I was on the outside looking in and there was no place for me. Scuba diving gave me something to do, somewhere to go. It gave me a reason to keep on moving and keep my mind moving. And then finally, the theme of military connection. So this, again, we talked about this a little bit in the last presentation, which was the idea of, because adaptive sports and adaptive scuba, there is this level of camaraderie that exists, obviously, in the military, and there's a lot of structure in the military. So our participants had expressed that because in diving and in Diveheart, you were helping each other out a lot, and you were all kind of in it together, that they felt that there was this sense similar to being in the military. So there was no other people that I could tell what I was going through, so in essence, I was alone until I was welcomed by this whole group of other veterans who were like me in a sense, and we ended up learning from each other, and that's when I realized I wasn't really alone in this. You're actually not doing something, you're actually doing something and you're relying on a teammate to accomplish that goal, as opposed to being, infantilized or treated like someone who has to be taken care of. I will also say that for our participants who participated in Diveheart, a lot of them went on to volunteer with Diveheart, and they said that working with children or other vets with disabilities also gave them a lot of perspective to the things they could do, and a lot of them took on this new role of being a volunteer. So to kind of discuss these themes that came out of it, all of our participants really echoed that this was a key piece in the rehab process for them, and again, that they couldn't really imagine their rehabilitation process without this. Going back to that theoretical lens that I kind of talked about earlier of MOHO, fitting it into that, this idea of volition, the motivation that gets us to do the things that we do and to know our abilities. Our participants said that they were able to try new activities, develop an overall sense of self-efficacy, and develop a belief in the ability to adapt in order to participate. For habituation, these patterns of the things that we do, a lot of them developed new roles or returned to former roles and developed a positive identity. Participation equaled community integration and a routine that they were able to build with this. And then environment, the social supports of fellow wounded warriors and veterans was definitely a benefit for these guys. And then this familiar context of structure and clear responsibilities and teamwork was also something that they expressed being attractive. So the so what of it is, obviously, there's a big physical aspect to participating in adaptive sports and adaptive scuba, which promotes health, and it offers an opportunity for leisure for these vets. But it also was good for their social inclusion and to be able to meet new people and start expressing themselves again. Community integration, again, getting out in the community and building routines. And then coping with disability and PTSD. All of our participants expressed in a way how participating in adaptive scuba helped them really cope with their condition and change their perspective. What were the things that were really unique to diving that people talked about? A few of our participants talked about how it's an elite sport, less than 1% of the population participates in it, and it's something that a lot of other people haven't done. So they said it was kind of like a bragging right to be able to say, yeah, I went out there and I scuba dived in this. The idea of weightlessness did come up with a couple of our other participants too, about especially our participant who had the spinal cord injury, about just all these benefits to being weightless and to kind of being free and being able to go out there and do this. And then the teamwork activity is also somewhat unique to diving too. So, sorry, I kind of sped through that. Are there any questions for that? It was a small study, and most of our participants were very close to Diveheart, so I do have to express that that could have had some could have been some bias, but that's also why that confirming case was really important for us.
There were 5 in this study?
There were 5 in the study. 4 were from Diveheart, and then 1 was outside of diving.
I think the social implications cannot be understated. As someone who went to a public high school where swimmers and divers were picked on and stigmatized by their students,
Okay.
and as a result, a lot of camaraderie emerged because people didn't like the swimmers and divers, but the swimmers and divers eventually didn't care because they had their own group.
Yeah, and one of our participants in an interview said he said that he really preferred doing things with Diveheart because it felt like it was a closer community and it was a little bit more private. And I think he said something along the lines of, like, his words, not mine, the Wounded Warrior Project just kind of schleps veterans around and makes a big, like, public event, and how he doesn't actually want to be around 100 or 200 people at a baseball game. That being in this kind of tighter-knit community was better for him. And I think he was also one who expressed how in the real world, you know, sometimes you have a job and someone gets promoted over you and it doesn't really make sense to you. But in the world of diving, there's very clear, like, standards of how you go about and get these different certifications of diving, right? You do this many dives and you work your way up, and I forgot what the levels of diving are to say. Okay. Is there anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, David.
Yeah, good job.
Thanks. You get back.
But what I wanted to say before that is I love these research presentations. I think it backs up everything that Diveheart says and promotes. There's other diving programs, and that would also support them as well, but I love it because we're seeing in research what we know when we're at the pool. And what we hope is that we share this with people who haven't heard of us or haven't heard of this type of activity that people can participate in, and we want to bring those people into the pool, into the ocean. And I keep thinking when we get our facility, there's going to be less argument against being able to do a lot of this research in a controlled environment, because we're going to be able to bring people in and do the research under controlled elements and get rid of some of the stuff that prohibits that type of research now.